Welcome everyone, it's Izen here, and what we are talking about today is the latest set of testing in the beta of the War Within when it comes to the raid. Now, we checked the results of the healers yesterday, but today we have something more interesting. Not just because looking around the DPS results is more fun, but also because the DPS are the ones who received the largest amount of balance tuning. This was the balance tuning of just a few days ago, so we were able to see multiple changes coming through Frost DK, Balance Druid. We also had changes to Hunters, Survival Hunter specifically. You had multiple changes and buffs to Arcane Mage and nerfs to Fire Mage. You had then changes to Rogues, as well as way larger flat buffs given to Arms Warrior, to Fury Warrior, and then also to all three Rogue specs, as well as Elemental Shaman. So it's not just checking out how things are going in the raid in the testing after a couple of weeks, but also looking at how these specs have been affected by all of these changes. So this was a couple of weeks ago, right? This was before several of these specs ended up being nerfed or rebalanced, right? We saw Fire Mage being the overall clear winner and best option across the board. However, Fire Mage was one of these specs that received multiple nerfs back to back, both to their preferred hero talent Sun Fury and also to their general abilities. So now, a couple of weeks later, with multiple changes down the line, we see that there has been a shift. The shift is that now Arcane is the mage specs performing very well. We even move on from Sikran, which is a pure single target boss, down to the Silken Court, which is a 2-target and even some cleave when the odds are out fight. Then you have Ulgrax, which has more AoE periods, and Arcane is still at the top. You can also move to the Bloodbound Horror, which does have some odd spawns you have to deal with. Arcane is still towards the top, and then the mythic version of Sikran, still Arcane very, very high. So, of course, this was expected because, as we know, there is a contract in Blizzard's rules that needs to have one mage performing super well at any given point. So if in the first round of the beta it was Fire and then Fire gets nerfed, don't worry, it's Arcane now, the spec doing very well. So Arcane, the current version of Arcane in the beta, was blessed with a series of changes in the last few days. They have gotten now to perform very well. This is a default single target talent build used by Arcane Mages in the beta right now. You can also move slightly more down the AoE side of things, or multi-target side of things, as well as cooldown focused build, playing more around Siphon Storm as you used to, due to the lining up of your cooldowns, 90 seconds for Evocation, 90 seconds for Arcane Surge. It's a very powerful combo. As you can see from the damage of Arcane, you know, at first glance, it still seems very simplistic, right? You just use Arcane Missiles and Arcane Blast, and then the few Arcane Barrages, not even worthwhile using them nearly as much when it comes to single target due to the damage of your Arcane Blast. And then when it comes to a more AoE-centric fight like Ulgrax, where you get to have more AoE damage, Arcane Blast suddenly gains way more value compared to other abilities. What is very relevant, though, about these changes given to Arcane is that most of this newfound power is very well accompanied by Spellslinger. Because at the moment, if we have to be honest, Spellslinger is amongst the highest damage dealing hero talents. You can see here on a fight, which is a pure single target fight like Sikran, you have practically 20%, more than 20% between Splinter Storm, Arcane Splinter, as well as Embedded Arcane Splinter. You have upwards of 25% of your damage coming from Arcane Splinter, right? This is practically still about the same. Even if you move towards a more AoE-focused fight like Ulgrax, you still have a very high performance of Arcane Splinter and Splinter Storm. Not as much as single target does, but still very high. So yes, the changes did help the builds of Arcane Mage. You still flow a lot, even more so now with Spellslinger, with your Arcane Charge generation thanks to Spells Frost Teachings, giving you free casts of Arcane Orb, which isn't really that useful for the damage that it does, especially in single target. It's way more because of the Arcane Charges you generate whenever you spawn Arcane Orb. All of this combined on top of the damage of Spellslinger is currently making Arcane the best performing spec in the beta on this latest round of tuning, together with, or slightly past, by the other one. But unlike Arcane, this one has continued to be performing well, because even in the very first days of the testing, Unholy was already doing, well. It was already towards the top half, top 5 even of the results. Now we are in the next round of tuning, and now Unholy has been consistently the best or second best performer next to Arcane Mage. Now, for Unholy, it is still, of course, around Sun Lane. Yes, Sun Lane has been nerfed, but it doesn't matter. Right now it is outperforming the Riders of the Apocalypse option for Unholy. There is an interesting split, if you can call it that, when it comes to Unholy, in the point where now it's kind of having you do more damage with Death Coil than anything else, which is a surprising thing, because this is not what you remember of when it comes to Unholy. They do have a very cyclical damage profile. Picture this in your mind if you just look at the buff halftime of Gift of the Sun Lane, and then you put it next to their actual damage, and then it's explained how their cyclical damage comes from. You have a couple of options in this build, this general build used by DKs in the beta, going towards more Vampire Strike or Score Strike damage, or more Death Coil damage. This talent has helped a lot. Death Coil doing even more relevant damage than before. You can even double down on this effect to take improved Death Coil to make your Death Coil do even more damage, but the result, whether you focus more on Death Coil or not, is that this cyclical damage remains, whether or not, or whenever you're allowed to spam Vampire Strike in these windows, like this, that comes with the Sun Lane buff, is what is currently giving Unholy DK a very powerful result in this latest set of testing. And this was, by the way, on multiple targets. This is relevant because you had Sikran, which was pure single target, and Unholy was doing very well. You had Silken Court, which is 2 targets, plus a few ads spawning every now and again. You had Olgrax, which was way more ads spawning, and Unholy was still doing great. And then even a Bloodbound Horror, which was single target, and then ads, and then single target, and then ads, and Unholy was still doing great. So amongst the overall best performers, it's Arcane and Unholy tied together at the very top. However, we still have time to look at some of the other nice performers, although these might not be nearly as, exciting as the others, because these are part of the gang of specs, which was simply flat out buffed, Like Arms, for example, was buffed in damage by 30%. Fury was buffed by 30%, you had the Rogue specs buffed by 15, 20, and 20, and then Elemental buffed by 30%. For example, in this latest round of tuning, you start from the single target of Sikran, and Elemental is at the very top 5 results. You go to the Silken Court, Elemental is top 10, you go to Mythic Olgrax, Elemental is top 4. So, yeah, it's doing well, but practically nothing has changed in their talent tree. They are still playing the same Lava Burst spam build in single target. They are playing now Farseer out of desperation because Stormbringer is practically a DPS loss to play with Tempest. So the playstyle remains this. The playstyle remains just spam Lava Burst, dump your Maelstrom with Elemental Blast. That's it. Even by the casts is very visible, the state of Shaman. So of course, in the results, it will get some top 4, top 5 results if you go and flat out buff all of its damage by 30%, right? Eventually, the more you continue buffing it, eventually it will get to do good numbers, but all of the problems of Elemental remains, even in some of the AoE fights like Olgrax, where you do have some ads spawning. Elemental managed, for example, to make it into the top 5. Well, this was the result. Just gear yourself towards massive AoE damage, play around Lightning Rod, and then spam a bunch of Chain Lightnings non-stop as ways to do damage. This would have been the same thing you would have done right now in Dragonflight. Just that now looks, slightly better because you got buffed by 30%. And we could say the same, by the way, about the neighbor of Elemental Fury, which was also buffed by 30%. and now also has better results. So in regards to these specs, it's less relevant, their current results now, due to the massive sweeping damage buffs they received, not because they changed something in talents, not because they got some changes in their hero talents, just because they got a flat out damage bump. And it's even less relevant for elemental, and perhaps even to enhancement, even though enhancement wasn't buffed, because as we know, just in a couple of days, Shaman is bound to receive some changes. So even this damage increase to elemental might not last long, given what could happen to them in just a couple of days. We have, however, also seen a shift since this new set of tuning. The last time we looked, we mentioned Warlock being the overall best DPS in the beta based on the results of all three specs combined, right? Starting from the first set of results, you had both Demo and Destruction, and then Affliction, a bit less, however, being towards the top half of results, consistently, right? As a class as a whole. While other specs had, you know, a top performer like Fire, but the other two specs weren't doing nearly as well, Warlock was doing well overall. However, as we got into this latest round of tuning, both Demo and Destro have been nerfed, especially in their hero talents. Hellcaller for Destruction and Diabolist for Demonology, but also Affliction wasn't touched, right? Affliction did not receive any nerfs. So the result now is that Affliction is performing well enough to, you know, to be in the top half or even in the top 10 of results, but more importantly, to be far ahead the other two Warlock specs. Obviously, it might be because more Warlock players are testing Affliction now, since Affliction is doing better, so you don't have nearly as many and as good of a results for the other two specs. But right now, Affliction is the standout performer when it comes to Warlocks. As mentioned, they weren't nerfed in Hellcaller, only the Destruction part of Hellcaller was nerfed. For Affliction, it was left just the same. The playstyle of Affliction is still very, very simple. You still have your damage profile on a 1 minute cooldown. You play with your 1 minute Soul Rot and your 1 minute Malevolence, and every other one of these minutes you also pop Dark Lair together with them. You can quite easily see here the damage bumps, which are buffed up by Malefic Rapture, which you are saving for these windows to spam at a much higher rate, because your generation of soul shards and the amount of times you can spam Malefic Rapture in these windows is going to be very, very high. So that's going to be your weaving in and out of Malefic Rapture spam. You do it inside the cooldowns, you chill for a while, you chill as you wait to get back to full soul shards, to get back to 2 stacks of your Tormented Crescendo for instacast Malefic Raptures, and then when your cooldowns are back, you pop them all together to do much more burst damage, and then rinse and repeat. And, you know, it's not very varied. Your Shadow Bolts are practically going to be the filler in between, much more so than your Malefic Rapture, to generate the soul shards you want to get to do damage with Malefic Rapture. Your dots now are becoming not an afterthought, but not nearly as relevant, because practically your corruption now Wither is up by itself permanently. You don't have to think about it. Unstable Affliction and Agony also don't have to be cast that often. You know, they get to be refreshed by themselves, besides Unstable Affliction. So it's not that many buttons that you have to think about when pressing your dots. So it still remains a quite straightforward rotation in the flow of 1 minute burst of damage you have, which is similar actually to Unholy. Unholy has a similar timing in terms of cooldown spacing that Affliction has, so they are kind of reminiscent in the way they both behave in terms of damage profile, and at the moment Affliction is the better performing of the DPS when it comes to Warlocks, after the other two received some reasonable nerfs. Now, up to now, we have seen the positives of the results. We have looked at the overall better performers throughout this latest round of tuning, including Unholy, Arcane, Elemental, even Fury Warrior, that have been given some minor or major sets of buffs in this last round of tuning. However, we also have some not so much nice performers, because, for example, despite the blanket buff given to all rogues, 15 and 20% more damage done, their performance continues to be awful. one of their hero talents, that Stalker, continues to be quite broken, and the other one, Fatebound, continues to be quite terrible. So there isn't right now a lot of happiness around rogues, even after these blanket buffs. Another couple of specs which were buffed overall were Frost Decay and Balance Druid. They both received significant buffs overall, but their overall performance continues to be somewhat poor, with the exception, more so now, of Frost Decay when it comes to more AoE focused encounters, because on Bloodbound Horror, which does have significant extra 5 to 6 target AoE when you go in the down phase fighting the adds, and then Olgrax, when you do spawn the adds, Frost Decay does have a significantly better result than when you have to straight up fight in single target, where Frost Decay gets significantly worse. However, that's not even the case for Balance. Balance is continuing to do just as badly regardless of the fight, even after being buffed overall. These have been so far the latest sets of results when it comes to raid testing after the latest round of tuning. These were actually quite good, quite nice results to check how specs have been doing because of their difference in damage profile. You had a pure single target fight, you had a cleave 2 target fight with add spawns, you had another single target fight with split adds to fight by yourself, and then you had another add fight with even more adds spawning. So the difference in damage profiles was quite varied in this latest round of tuning, so you got to see different specs, how they approach different fights in terms of damage, and we did see some specs being consistent in their results towards the top, as we mentioned, Unholy and Arcane overall, but also Affliction has been doing quite well, Beast Mastery, Havoc Demon Hunter, Enhancement, Elemental Shaman, Windwalker Monk, Ret Paladin have been overall some of the better performers across different fights, and then across multiple fights, the worst performers being the rogues, being the other 2 mage specs, including the previously best performer Fire Mage. You had a couple of the hunter specs, Balance Druid, and a handful of others, including Shadow Priest not doing nearly as well as Frost Decay outside of AoE fights. So for now, this was the recap of the results in this latest round of beta testing when it comes to the raid and multiple different damage profiles that you could test the specs on. So we will see, of course, in a couple of days, if any, and if how much balance tuning is going to come through in the next reset of the beta, to then, of course, go down and inspect the changes given to these specs. But for now, this is what we have in terms of results, raid-wise, in the beta of the War Within for the DPS specs. So for today, on this Sunday, it's time to leave each other, starting our goodbyes with the thanks of everyone who has watched this video, together with everyone who is also supporting by liking and commenting down below on this video, together with, of course, subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime...